Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
We're here with Dennis Rivers. Would you just introduce yourself, Dennis, and just talk a little bit about yourself, and then maybe go on into if you have any personal stories about having experienced empathy in your life.
My name is Dennis Rivers, and I'm a writer and communication skills trainer, and I've written a couple of books about communication skills, and part of that is that I come from a family of people who struggled to communicate with each other and failed a lot. So my dad didn't talk to my sister for 20 years. They've both passed away. And that set me on a quest to understand communication skills more. I think the most transformative experience I had about empathy was applying some of the practices taught by Marshall Rosenberg in the middle of my family feud. There was a feud in my family that went on for half a century, and part of that was very personal, and part of it was political. So as a result, I didn't get invited home for 25 years. So when I finally got invited home, my stepmother went out of her way to insult me. She knew that I was a peace activist, so she went out of her way to explain that she supported the Contra War in Nicaragua, the war that the United States funded to destroy the Nicaraguan people and their effort to make a cooperative life, and that she thought that people who, Vietnam veterans who cried about their role in killing lots of people in Vietnam were truly disgusting. So it was like she was throwing down the gauntlet, and she went on and on about Nicaragua. And so what I did was, instead of contradicting her, I said I tried using Marshall Rosenberg's recommendations about empathic listening. And I said, so Winifred, when you read the newspapers about what's happening in Latin America, you get really upset because it seems to you that the Russians are horning in down there in Nicaragua, and you want the Russians to go home. She said, yes. And the argument was over. I mean, it was like all of this, I'm going to pick a fight, I'm going to get you angry, I'm going to knock you off your balance by saying something really, I'm going to insult you, and then you'll pick up the bait and insult me back, and then we'll keep the family feud that's been going on for a quarter of a century, we'll keep it going. And none of that happened because I just said, so that's how you see it, Winifred? She said, yes. So that I incorporated some of that learning into my 7 Challenges workbook, where I talk about the difference between acknowledgement and agreement. We want people to agree with us, that's true. We also want people to just understand what we're saying and acknowledge what we're saying. And those are 2 different things. And quite often in conversation, you can give people half of what they want, even if you can't give them all of what they want. So you can give people lots of acknowledgement, even if you don't agree with them. And often, giving people half of what they want is a whole giant step past giving people nothing, which is often the case in arguments. People saying, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to hear it. Is to say, oh, so you think that, we really ought to take every person who's not a citizen of the United States and just truck them to the border and send them home. That's how you see it. And,
so you just gave her acknowledgement in terms of what she heard, and somehow that was satisfying to her.
That was satisfying.
Uh-huh.
The need to be acknowledged is a primordial need.
Mm-hmm.
and we also want to be agreed with. But it's amazing how much people are willing to live with it. They can forego agreement if they get enough acknowledgement, or at least a lot of people will respond that way. So that was a revelation to me, that experience that I had with my stepmother, who was bent on starting a new fight.
And so how did that relationship kind of evolve? Did you kind of learn more? Did it get better in that sense? Was that kind of a transformational moment, or?
Well, what happened was my stepmom and I had a kind of a truce, but what that truce allowed my dad and I to have a relationship, because my dad was dying, and so if my stepmother had been able to start a new fight, she would have driven me out of my father's world just when my father needed me most. So the main effect of that was that I was able to navigate around my stepmom and take care of my dad. So it was a big success for me.
Well, okay. That was another question I've been asking people about is how would they go about building a culture of empathy? So if you saw that as a vision and a goal, how would you go about doing that?
Well, I think I would start some sort of card game or board game, something that was fun. Or maybe a game for school kids to play that was something like a combination of empathy and hopscotch. So there'd be different ways of learning this.
So create some kind of games that are kind of fun and entertaining and engaging to...
That allow people to explore empathic moves in conversation. But what also, we think of empathy as now I'm empathizing with you, so I'm listening to you in a special way. But I think one of the things that Marshall Rosenberg was trying to help people with is you can express yourself in a way that's a lot easier for other people to empathize with. For example, if you spilled something on the floor, I could express myself by saying, Edwin, how could you be such a clumsy idiot? Which, of course, is a question that you would never want to answer. But I've expressed my frustration in a way that that's going to be very difficult for you. You're going to have to do a lot of translating. Whereas if I said, Edwin, when I see that olive oil on the floor, I feel really upset because I imagine one of our customers is going to slip on it like in 60 seconds and sue us for $1 million. So I'd really like you to clean that up right now. And that would be a lot easier. What I'm doing in that is I'm shifting away from what was wrong in the past, and I'm focusing about what's going to be right in the future. I'm making in that sentence, I'm making a transition from what was wrong in the past and my fears and so on to having a vision of how the future is going to be better because you're going to clean it up and it'll be all nice again. So in that, those 4-part sentences that Marshall Rosenberg was coaching people, that's self-expression that makes it easy for the other person to empathize.
Yeah, so it sounds like that nonviolent communication had quite an effect on your life then.
It did. It did. It was the perfect next step for me. I wouldn't say that nonviolent communication necessarily covers every single base in the whole communication world, but it covers a bunch of really important ones. And for me, it was a fantastic next step. And I didn't outgrow any of the things that I learned from Marshall Rosenberg. What I did was I learned other things that I could add to it. So I really do honor him as a tremendously inspiring teacher who helped me along my way.
Well, the question was about building a culture of empathy. So is that are you saying one is create a game for empathy, something that I guess is easy to for people to play and kind of get involved in, and the other is maybe learn
There's that,
NVC?
yes. NBC is certainly a step. What I would definitely recommend also would be a book of breakthrough stories, because people really do learn from personal stories, and this is part of an approach that I'm sure you're familiar with called appreciative inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind appreciative inquiry is if 100 people are doing it wrong and one person is doing it right, go pay attention to the one person who's doing it right. If you're if there are 100 houses burning on a hillside and there's one house that's not burning, if you're a firefighter, you just go put your attention on the 100 houses that are burning. But if you're an urban planner, you come a week later and you pay attention to that one house that didn't burn, because that holds the secret for how to be.
Well, that's kind of like I've been looking for the empathy superstars. You know, it's like, who are the empathy superstars out there in the world to go and kind of meet them? And there's a lot of academics who have studied empathy, and they haven't necessarily kind of embodied the essence of empathy. They kind of look at it more from the outside. So I'm really looking for those superstars out there.
Well, I wish that I could name you 10, but the person who comes right into my mind is the Dalai Lama in relation to the Chinese. The Dalai Lama has bent over backwards to recognize the concerns of the Chinese, and while the Chinese are treating the Tibetans very badly. So the stage would be set using the old lizard brain, you bite me and then I bite you back even harder. The stage would be set for the Dalai Lama to really attack or demean the Chinese, which he goes out of his way not to do, but always to keep the door open for and keep a vision of cooperation. He even has tried to frame issues of Tibetan self-governance to address the concerns of the Chinese. Like, the Tibetans don't want to have an army of their own. They're perfectly willing to let the government of China, handle external relations. So they're not, if the Chinese are worried about security on their western border, then the Dalai Lama is trying to acknowledge, to empathize with their needs for security and meet them halfway.
Right.
Saying, okay, you can be in charge of the borders. What we're concerned about is keeping our culture alive.
Yeah, one thing I'm kind of looking for is kind of everyday people who are very empathic. Like, the Dalai Lama is sort of a special case, is the head of an organization. It's kind of part of the job description, like that, to kind of do, and then everybody's telling you your holiness and all that, and you got to kind of live up to the to the image I'm imagining, And so who are those people out there who are just everyday people who, somehow there's these people who, as a young kid, they kind of tapped into empathy as a value, or maybe their parents taught them. And then throughout life, they've constantly been honing and learning and kind of deepening that sense of empathy. And it's kind of like it's just out of their own, I don't know.
I can also tell you another place to look. There's an organization in Santa Barbara called Everyday Gandhis. And they seek out those people and give them an award or give them some financial support or something. So you could Google Everyday Gandhis and look at the award winners, because they tend to be more people from everyday life who've done extraordinary things. And the Everyday Gandhis organization is trying to recognize that and give them support to continue. in the path that they had already picked for themselves.
Right. So these are people who are already out there kind of doing maybe entrepreneurial or social kind of work, and they're kind of being supported.
In Africa, serving their village. There's a giant problem in Africa with child soldiers and the rehabilitation of child soldiers. So there's many organizations that are trying to be helpful in relation to the thousands of deeply disturbed young people who committed murder when they were like 9 or 10 years old.
Yeah, there's kind of no shortage of problems out there in the world. In
need of our empathy.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
I think that well, we do want everyday people, but we also do want almost like symbolic heroes. So I think we need both. And the symbolic heroes like St. Francis and the Dalai Lama and Franz Jägersdottir, the Austrian farmer who realizes that he doesn't have anything against the French or the Russians. He doesn't, and he just refuses to be drafted into the German army in World War II, following his own conscience. So those people are really important because they show us what's possible. They expand the territory of human possibility for us to grow into. And then the everyday people, and the people who are just one step ahead of us, they encourage us to take that very next step. It's like they're right next to us, and the Franz Jägersdottirs and the other people are kind of at the far boundary. So they define the territory that we want to cross, the dimensions in which we ourselves want to develop.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking for who those people are in kind of everyday life. They're very empathic.
Yes.
And then try to surround myself with those people, and then they're kind of like...
The problem with that is that in order for you to find them, they have to get fairly well known. And once they're well known enough for you to find them, they're not just the ordinary people. In order to find the ordinary people, you would have to kind of lurk like a journalist and a secret journalist, an undercover journalist, lurk on street corners or lurk in coffee shops, listening for those empathic conversations. I don't know exactly how you're going to find the people. By the time they show up on your radar, they're not just ordinary folks anymore.
Well, I have a web page where I've put together a whole list of empathic tests, everything from self-assessment to reading emotions in people's faces. And I know the Greater Good Science Center, they were doing tests with people, and they had some actually, I'm not really sure what tests they used, but they would kind of find what they call the compassion superstars. So, people kind of fall on a range, so you can kind of find, maybe somehow assess how good people are. Maybe there's some way of doing some kind of an assessment test or something like that.
I'm not sure exactly who that would help.
It would help me.
But I'm not even sure how it would help you, because often deficits in empathizing are pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's kind of, I've been around people who are in great need themselves, and I don't want to kind of exclude them, but I found that when I'm with people who are very empathic, it kind of grounds me more, and I feel for building a culture of empathy, we really need to get a core of people together who really value empathy and really are committed to empathy and deepening empathy. And I've even thought of putting together like an empathy house, right? So kind of like a cooperative house that brings together people who are really committed to exploring and experimenting. Like, what does what do you do socially to deepen empathy?
Well, you could see that some recent work I'm assuming that we're still videotaping. So
Yes, we are.
Including this for your dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
A recent article that I wrote on the ecobodhi.org website, ecobodhi.org, called Companions in Blessing, kind of it touches on the issue that you're raising because you are wanting companions in development.
Yes.
Because you yourself want to develop, and you're discovering, wow, it's like, if I want to be a better tennis player, it's awfully difficult to learn that by myself. I need someone to play tennis with. And it turns out there's a whole other range of human abilities that are very difficult to develop alone and are develop much better with interaction with other people. And in that paper of mine, Companions and Blessing, I was trying to sketch out a whole range of creative friendships that a person could have, and knowing that, being able to have a vocabulary could help people identify the different sort of mutual support alliances that they want to enter into.
So it's like a friendship, and you say our friendship, we want it to be a deepening empathic friendship, and here's a set of tools that we can use to deepen our empathy with each other. Something like that is.
Well, I'm not exactly saying that, Edwin. What I'm saying is that, for example, well, you and I, most of the time, friendship unfolds at a kind of an unstated and an unconscious way. It unfolds entirely at the level of intuition, of kind of feelings that are not articulated. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking a friendship out of the world of intuition, of things that are felt but not put into words. And I'm kind of putting into the words, and I'm saying, well, for starters, I know of 12 different ways that we can be friends. We can both be working on issues of conscience, and then I become your ally in conscience. You say, I don't like landmines, or I'm against war, and I say, Edwin, I stand with you against war. So I become your companion in conscience. Or you could be trying to develop you're writing a screenplay, and I'm writing a screenplay too. So we become allies in creativity. So when you talk about developing empathy, you're actually talking about developing a very personal quality, and that is what I have identified as being a companion in life development. And this is actually often a theme in friendship. It's not a stated theme, but people, and I think that perhaps this happens much more often between women. Women become friends, and they stay friends for 20 or 30 years. And partly what they're doing is they're walking through the seasons of life together and kind of comparing notes on the experiences they're having and the kind of persons they're becoming. So woven into this process of just being a shoulder to cry on, there's also being a kind of an encourager. Each one is kind of there to encourage the other, saying to, try harder or be more resilient, those kinds of things. So I think that, as part of building a culture of empathy, it's an interesting question for me to ask you is, do you imagine that we can build a culture of empathy if our culture of friendship continues to stay at this entirely intuitive level and is not articulated? Now, you may not agree with my particular articulation, but I think you can see I'm trying to develop almost like a cartography of developmental companionship to make it easier for people to talk about what they're doing.
Yeah, for me, it reminds me of dance. And dance is a very empathic process, and it's done more at the feeling level. So it's more at the mirror neurons, mirroring, body mirroring, and there is the component too of of the perspective taking and empathic cognitive empathy. And I really would like to have the two be kind of congruent or match up, so that there is a sort of a philosophy or a perspective of empathy. For example, we have in the philosophers for the past, I don't know how many years, they've been saying people are born greedy and selfish. And they go through, Freud, Locke, the whole kit and caboodle of the philosophers have been telling us. And it goes against our experience. It's like people say, this is not right, but the society is telling you that this, there's this mismatch with the model. And so it'd be nice if the model and the experience kind of match up. The model that we do feel empathy, and that now it's starting to match up with the science kind of coming along and saying, hey, our model of everybody is greedy and selfish hasn't been accurate. And that there is this empathic capability that people have built in.
And it seems to me there's a couple of ways that you could deal with that. One is you could say, well, people aren't greedy and selfish. They're really basically kind and loving. That would be one way of dealing with it. That would assume that people are primarily one way or another. And then another way of dealing with it would be to say people are more complex than either of those models allow. That people can be both cruel and kind, and we're sort of ambiguous and kind of what the psychologists call labile. We can kind of shift around. I mean, some people are more labile than others. People who are mentally ill can just totally go from being sweet and kind to being totally enraged and violent, like in a matter of seconds. You'd say then, that person doesn't have any kind of inner consistency. But I do think that people are complex, and that we are somewhat, we can be triggered by our circumstances, especially if you've never thought about it.
Yeah.
So one of the things about teaching empathy is if you have an empathy toolkit and you've thought about it, and you go into an environment, this is what nonviolence training is about. You go into an environment that would normally trigger you to be violent. Now you've got this toolkit so you can navigate around those things. I remember once I got in an argument with my sister, and she said something about she was going to teach me a lesson. And I started to say back to her, the words were forming in my mind. I think I actually got the words, you think you're going to teach me a lesson? Well, I'm gonna. And then I kind of went, I could hear what I was saying, and I just stopped. And I think I said, I'm going to calm down. I'm gonna back up a little. So I think that that's to see us as complex and having lots of potentiality.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do see that. It's not that we're all empathic. It's that it's kind of that interplay. I mean, biologically, there's an interplay of empathy, of fear, what kind of brings us between fear and empathy. So that's kind of like a complexity and a dynamic that happens. Mm-hmm. And it can get even more complex than that. But as philosophers have said, we're greedy, selfish beings on one hand, and they haven't really kind of explained the other, and that there's kind of pathways and gradations between the two. If we become afraid, if I'm empathic with you, and suddenly I feel threatened in some way, my ambient of empathy kind of shuts down, and have that fear, and you can physically feel the fear. So I think that's just speaking to the complexity that you're talking about. That
yes. And I think that philosophers and trainers use language in different ways. Philosophers are trying to explain what's already happened. But trainers are trying to help something new happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I noticed that in my experience as a trainer, that explanations are overrated. The whole process of explaining is overrated. Explaining why you yell at people will only carry you so far. I might be able to give you 4 or 5 new tools that you'd never thought of before, and that's going to cause you to yell at people a whole lot less. But it's not an explanation of why you yelled. It's just a completely change in the configuration. For example, I might help you ask more open-ended questions. Like instead of saying, did you like that movie? Or do you like the way I've arranged the furniture? I'd say, how much or how little, Edwin, do you like the way I've arranged the furniture in the office? And then that would give me a lot more information about, and help us cooperate. So I would feel much less the need to yell at you.
Yeah.
But you can see that what I taught you is not an explanation of yelling. It's like dropping a new bead into the kaleidoscope. With that new skill, you make a whole set of new patterns that is now different than the patterns you would have made before.
Well, let me ask you, if you're kind of on this quest for building a culture of empathy, what questions would you ask?
Okay, what questions would I ask? Well, I'm stopping to think about that because that's really a good that's a meta question, and it's really powerful. Probably how are we going to start over? I think one of the big problems in life is the problem of momentum. People start making a mistake, like the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq. Then they get embedded in the mistake, so they can't admit the mistake. And then the mistake just rolls on and on and on, because no one wants to be the person who finally says, whoever says this is a big mistake and a big waste, they're going to be the object of a lot of bad feelings. It's funny because John Kerry, after the Vietnam War, or close to the end of the Vietnam War, John Kerry said, how do you ask somebody to be the last person to die for a mistake? But now we got into this kind of muddle-headed war, and exactly the same situation over there again. And so I think one of the really creative questions that we would want to ask is, what are the resources that allow people to start over? It seems like forgiveness is one of those resources. If you're a general in charge of if you're the general in charge of Afghanistan, and I approach you and I say, you low down son of a gun, you've lost all these men and for nothing, that you're just going to defend yourself. You're not going to want to stop. So if I said, for whatever's happened in the past, I forgive you completely, how are we going to get ourselves out of here? You would be much more willing to have a dialogue with me or think some new thoughts, because I wouldn't be provoking you to defend yourself. But it seems like, how can we start over again? What are in building the culture of empathy, we need a toolkit for how to start over again, because bureaucratic momentum is a horrendous problem. I can give you an even more dramatic example. the person who was in charge, the Army general who was in charge of the development of the atomic bomb during World War II, was named Leslie Groves. He was a general in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And it turned out that toward the end of World War II, we actually didn't need the atomic bomb because the Japanese were running out of food. The Japanese probably would have surrendered within a month or two because Japan was exhausted from the war. What General Grove said, in an interview after the war, he said, we had to use the atomic bomb because if we didn't use it after the war, the congressional committees would have come after us and said, how come you spent all these billions of dollars building a weapon that you didn't use? So that the investment of money set this terrible momentum in force, that a kind of social process that was building on itself, so that toward the end, even though it wasn't necessary, it got used anyway. So I see social momentum as being a kind of serious predicament, and empathy might play a role in there. Or building a culture of empathy is somehow tangled up. There's so many areas where we're going to want to slow down a kind of perverse momentum, and I think empathy would play a role. Like if somebody had asked Groves some kind of question earlier in the process, you know, like, how do you feel about this, or what's going to happen if we don't need it, or something, maybe there could have been some sort of possibility. People would have felt that it was possible to steer in a different, make a different choice.
So it's kind of like ask questions that that kind of leave the past behind, that where you can have a new beginning in a sense, something that would stimulate. Yeah, how do we create a new beginning with a culture of empathy or something like that?
Well, for one thing, a deep question includes a promise to listen. Between people, of course, people write questions on a piece of paper and then they just float away from conversations. But in conversation, I would say that the more sincere a question is, the more it includes a promise to listen to whatever answer you may offer.
It might be something.
Like it? Did you like it? It's clear that I want you to say yes.
Yeah, it's something about probably addressing the great pain that people are in would be one kind of one factor of a deep question. I know someone that works with NVC in business, and she was just talking about the great pain that people are have in kind of the business world. And when I went to Oakland to the demonstrations that were there for the Johannes Messerly and Oscar Grant shooting, I mean, you could just feel, I mean, the pain was so thick in some points, you can just kind of almost like cut it with a knife, so to speak. And there's that underlying pain throughout society, which, you know, people try to, you know, push away, and kind of a resolution for that pain seems to be the empathy, you know, to have it be heard and then kind of take actions to start anew without that pain.
So I see empathy as woven into, empathy is a relatively recent term. It's only been in our language for maybe 150 years. But I see it being a vital component of processes or virtues that we've known about for much longer, especially forgiveness and gratitude. So
yeah, you're wanting to weave those other values in on it take in with it.
Because I tend to have a more Buddhist and systems theory picture of human values. That values exist in a complex, like a complex fishnet, where every knot is connected to all the other knots.
Yeah.
And when you grab a hold of the fishnet and you grab a hold of one knot and you pull it toward you, you're really pulling the whole fishnet toward you from the point of view of that knot. But you can't say, I'm really going to understand this knot because I'm just going to cut it out of the fishnet.
Yeah.
I don't want any, if I say, well, I'm going to get rid of everything in the fishnet and only understand the knot. But once you get rid of all those other strands,
yeah,
there's nothing left. The knot disappears.
Yeah. Well, another way to look, another way of looking at it is you've got the fishnet and you're going to hang it up to dry or whatever, right? And how are you going to hang it? Are you going to hang it from the edge so that the whole fishnet kind of drapes on the ground? Or are you going to kind of hang it from the middle so the whole thing kind of, hangs in the air and can dry or whatever? So it's like there's advantages of working differently with the different knots, right? Meaning,
yes.
If you kind of, I'm kind of seeing that empathy is kind of this one knot that's like, it's a very strong knot. The net has a whole weave to it, and this is a pretty strong point. And, things can hang pretty well from there. It's not discounting all the others. It's just kind of, you kind of use the different knots differently and to different advantage or to different function to different functions.
Well, I would agree with you, but by kind of shifting the analogy, I would say that empathy is kind of like the heart of human life. It's absolutely the heart of life. But the issue there would be that the heart is not the only vital organ. You also have something like the pancreas. It's kind of like this ugly little thing down there that nobody figured out. People have been talking about the heart for many centuries, but we've only understood the pancreas maybe in the past 100 years. But it turns out, that the pancreas is a vital organ. You can't live without it. So it turns out the heart co-emerges in a concert with the other vital organs of our body. And it is the center of life. But the center of life actually needs the periphery in order to live. So you could say that empathy is really it's the heart of human virtues. But those human virtues, that human virtue grows or depends on things like honesty and forgiveness and gratitude and courage and creativity. Empathy is tremendously creative, and you get better at it, because you use your imagination to imagine, to reconstruct inside of yourself the experience of the other person, and then you bring it out in some sort of way that's clever and engaging, so that there's profound creative elements in empathy, and also honesty. Maybe the other person is unhappy or is suffering because of something that I did. And then I'm going to have a hard time empathizing with their problem if I'm the person who caused their problem. So then you get kind of issues about ego strength and honesty that come in. We still don't, we're very adamant in the United States about our right to have nuclear weapons. And we're adamant about our being against abortion. And people just don't want to admit that the atomic bomb that we dropped on Hiroshima instantly performed like 5,000 or 6,000 abortions. When we are, there are many situations in life where we ourselves are implicated in causing the difficulty, and so that's a major challenge to empathizing.
Yeah.
You know, I was just in this situation where I moved into a house. I rented a room in a house, and it turned out that a big part of the house was infested with fleas. And the house manager had a really difficult time empathizing with me. I mean, she just had such a hard time saying, wow, I understand you're really uncomfortable with these fleas. Instead, she got kind of irritated with me, and she just told me, well, why don't you just go away for a couple of weeks? When you come back, the fleas will be gone. And I got angry with her when she said that, because she wasn't empathizing with me at all. It wasn't my responsibility to go away. It was her responsibility to make sure there weren't insects in the house.
Yeah, there's kind of a lot of points you're making, but the one is a project that I'm wanting to do is one thing I ask people about what their most important value is, and then try to make the connection between empathy and that value.
Yes.
And I've talked to people, you know, peace, justice, you know, love and compassion, and just having all those different values kind of and how they connect to empathy. So I'm
I
kind of,
just gave you honesty and courage.
yeah, as other ones.
The courage to face one's own mistakes. And honesty, courage, and the ego strength to realize that you might have hurt someone else. Some people's egos are so fragile, they can't tolerate the implication that they might have hurt someone, because that would mean they're a bad person. Like they don't have enough residual sense of okayness.
Yeah.
That if you hurt somebody, then they just fall into this, oh, I'm terrible.
They'll feel kind of alienated and maybe excommunicated and that'll kind of be maybe like added pain or something.
But it's even internal, you know.
Yeah.
Because there are fragile souls in this world who have a feeling that either I'm all good or I'm all bad. And so as soon as I make a mistake, I'm all bad. And that's not a resilient way of going through life, but it's a way that, you know, it happens that a lot of people are vulnerable to that kind of black and white thinking. And then it gets really hard to empathize with people. You know, if I broke a piece of your furniture and I have a hard time empathizing, I might blame you and say, well, you shouldn't have left it out there where I would have stumbled over it. It was your fault.
Well, it gets complicated. I should probably bring this to an end. We've gone for about 50 minutes now, surprisingly. Is there any kind of a wrap-up, kind of a final wrap-up? And I appreciate also you kind of experimenting with me. This is my first interview with this program, so it's been, we'll see how it turns out. I'll upload it.
Beta.
Yeah, you're the beta.
My hair is like leaking out in every which direction in celebration of this trial run. No, I'm really happy, Edwin, that you and I got to kind of touch on this idea that that the Buddhist vision or the systems theory vision that all human values arise in a complex relation to one another, and that opens up all sorts of creative possibilities for connecting empathy with other significant human values, and so that's something that we can, you know, kind of explore in dialogues to come.
Okay, I look forward to our future dialogues, and I enjoy chatting with you. We had a long talk. I think it was like 3 or 4 hours yesterday when you came over. So I think we're on to our 6th hour.
All right.
Okay.
So I'm going to go out for a walk.
Okay, great.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.